It's very likely that if you're watching this video, at some point you have wished you could design your own game or have an idea about a game that you would like to design. That's why we organized this panel in which Michael Fox from Sprocket Games, Alan Paul and Tony Boydell from Surprise Stair Games were joined by Dr. Mike Ruddy, Professor of Game Design at the University of Cardiff, to answer questions from the audience and offer advice as to how to design your own board game. If that is what you would like to do at some point, you better stay and watch this panel because it's going to be awesome.
We're here to talk about board game design. We've all designed stuff. Some of you guys in the crowd have designed it as well. Some of you are thinking about going into it. You're all mental. It's a beautiful and wonderful thing, game design. You have an idea in your head, and instead of just doing, making a computer game, making a video game, you need to know how to code, you need to know how to do this, you need to know how to do that, you need to know how to, people who can do graphics and all this sort of awful, horrible stuff. With a board game, all you need is your brain and a couple of bits of paper and a pen, and you're awesome. That's what you start with. You don't need the ability to create fantastic plastic miniatures from scratch. Come on a panel. Ladies and gentlemen, David Brayshaw from Guards, from Backspindle Games. Also doing Kadinka and Luchador Mexican Wrestling Dice, although you didn't design it, that was Mark. And Clax. So, board game design, it is this amazing thing that anybody can do. However, doing it right is the hard bit. Take over.
Okay. Right, I'm going to start off because I'm at the very early stages of the process because I teach game design, so I get students coming up to me who really think they know how to design a game. And the first thing I would say is, when it's in your head, it's not a game. Yeah, so long as it stays in your head, oh yeah, I know exactly how it works, it's not a game. It has to come down and be made physical. And I've got a little prop here, which is my game design book. And that's the other tip I'd say to you is, take a game design book with you everywhere, even in the bath.
Do we all have one of these?
Because this has got all my latest kind of game designs, our thoughts, expressions, and please feel free to come up afterwards and have a look at this. But seriously, if you have an idea you take from this and you make it into a game, I will be really happy because ideas are cheap. Ideas you can get 10 a penny. When you make it into a finished game that someone else can play without you there, just by reading the rules, that is the big thing, is finishing something. So I teach students and I brainstorm with them, and we design, no, brainwash actually, you're all game designers, and give me your credit cards. But we the first thing we do is we break the ice by getting them to design and prototype and test a game in 15 minutes, a paper-based game, and I do it with all my students, and we usually end up with at least 4 or 5 workable games after an hour from a class of students. And I've done this with kids, with adults, with students at university or somewhere in between, and it really does work. So that's one thing I would say to you at the end of it, is go away and design a game in 15 minutes.
I would say, the notebook's fine. I'm not going to decry notebooks, but have a database or a spreadsheet or something which you can carry with you wherever you are. I like the in the bath thing. It's quite useful.
I wouldn't put my iPhone in the bath.
I wouldn't put that in the bath. No. But I have a database, and I have something which is called an ideas database, where you can just stuff in everything, and you've got it electronically recorded. And I used to run just notebooks, and then if I look around the house now, just trying to sort out things, I've got notebooks everywhere. I'm doing a current game, and I was trying to find where the hell was my original notebook for that game, and I couldn't find it. It took me about 4 days just to find the notebook. But if it's all on a database which you've got accessible, modern technology nowadays allows you to just stick everything onto some kind of phone.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of between the two of you.
You are, actually.
Yeah. I'm literally between the two of you, and I'm between. My wife will attest. There is a horrible book that sits in our house, which looks very similar to that. That is just filled with scribbles and that's an idea for that, and there's an idea for that. But recently, I've been going down that route and using stuff on my phone as well. A system called Evernote, an app which is very, very useful indeed. You can do audio stuff on it, you can do written stuff on it, whatever, take photos, you can just save things on there. But it also uploads it and it's accessible on your computer as well. So it's very, very useful indeed. Any ideas you have, scribble them down, because there's nothing worse than waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and just going, that's really actually quite a nice idea for a game. And then waking up 5 hours later and then going, crap, what was I thinking of? Oh, I can't remember for the life of me. So yeah.
Big thing is don't throw anything away.
Yeah.
Don't throw anything
Oh no, you end up on a TV programme and somebody come round and do an intervention.
That's it. You could say hoarders, like boarders.
Board hoarders.
Oh,
Board
man.
games.
Channel 5 are going to be on us.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Actually, yes, even
Cardboard in
yeah,
our house, I don't blame them.
even keep the bad ideas too.
Oh, yeah,
Because you can
'cause
have
no such thing
really
as a bad
really
idea.
bad ideas. We've had some bad ideas, usually coming back from Essen, haven't we?
Standard
Some of those.
Oh.
Sorry.
Very good. Yeah, the trouble is the bad ideas can actually lead you to a good idea in the end.
They also
Go on, you've picked
well,
that
no,
up.
well,
Feed it to
well,
you there, Tom.
yeah, but they also break the ice as well. If you're feeling really depressed, you can have a really good laugh and think, what was I thinking when I did that? But I mean, I think keeping notes is a fairly obvious thing. I mean, I would be interested as to how people come to their idea in the first place, because I don't believe that they just shoot out of the sky on a lightning bolt and that's you've suddenly got a grickler in your head. Because if you did, then you can't do anything with it because it's already out there. But the point is, how do people get their inspiration for games?
Well,
For me-
where did you get inspiration for Snowdonia?
Yeah.
Well, Snowdonia came out of, apologies if anyone's read this little story before, but we were talking about train games at Essen about 8 years ago, 7 years ago. And the proliferation of train games, people, wearing top hats and share dealing and doing all these great, wonderful networks across Northern America. And we said, in Surprise Dare, we like to do games that are slightly different, familiar themes maybe, but with a little twist that makes it a bit unusual. And I said, well, we couldn't do lots of railways, we'd have to do one railway. And if we did one railway, it would have to be not a long network of bits and pieces of branches, it would have to be physically building the railway in the game. And then somebody said, well, where would that be? And the first thing I could think of was Mount Snowdon.
Yeah.
So that gets put down in the little notebook, and you kind of leave it for a few months, but then you go, actually, that's quite a nice idea.
So we have a railway game with
one
fixed
railway.
track, one railway, fixed track, no shares.
No shares.
It's a worker placement game where you are the workers, you are actual labourers.
But I mean,
For
that
advertising
came
purposes.
out of a jokey conversation, but
Yeah.
You watch a television programme. Richard Breese designed Brief Encounter, having watched the Blue Planet series on BBC, was inspired to design a game about sea life, about corals and that kind of stuff. So sometimes you don't have the notebook with you when it happens. So I would say don't fret about it, enjoy the source, and then go and write it all down afterwards, and let it brew in your head.
I mean, I'm currently working on a game called The Most Dangerous Game, which is based on the old story and movie from the 1920s called The Most Dangerous Game. And I watched it and I read the story then afterwards and saw this would actually make a great idea. The idea is that a renowned hunter ends up deserted on this island with like a crazy hunter whose only prey is humans. And it's like this simple card game where you're trying, there is one card which is the hunted, and you're trying to get rid of it, or if it's the last one in your hand, then you will, you'll be successful, you'll manage to escape the hunter. But as Tony says, ideas can come from anywhere, silly conversations, TV shows that you watch.
Well, yeah, I mean, my youngest boy, his favourite movie for a long time was Those Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines. Now, there's a wonderful deck-building, deck-taking-apart game where the first half of the game is you're trying to spoil people's decks with sabotage, but clear out your deck of sabotage stuff. And then the second half of the game is a race, using the deck that you've been constructing in the first half of the game. And it's a great theme, it's a funny film, the things come from nowhere. I mean, I'd just be interested, for those who are saying that they are designing games and have designed games, where they're getting their inspiration from.
Yeah, let's
get some feedback from you guys.
I was going to speak about me because I'm slightly different. One, I'm from Ireland, which is probably different. But I have a Leonard. Leonard is the other half of our partnership. And Leonard is very, 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 like Leonardo, he is very creative. And if you didn't stop him, you would have all the hoarder stuff. So I'm very much the person who comes in and stops him. I actually have a Bugs Bunny t-shirt at home, which says on it, question everything. So, I mean, you talk about Mark's wrestling dice game. Mark brought it, again, Mark's very creative, Leonard's very creative, they're both big and I'm small, and I sort of get in the middle. But that's okay. He brought this idea to us, and Leonard did this, and Leonard did that, and Mark did this and that. And then, I just went, no, I don't like this at all. And turned it on its head. It completely turned the actions on its head of what Mark and Leonard had sort of come around with. I was like, oh, my idea. I think you need to be big enough as a creative person to take that step back and, as you say, think about the other idea from all the other people's perspective, and then let them go back at it again, and then the idea improves much, much more. And the whole luchador thing now is really successful, obviously, this weekend. So I think very much as a, you know, I'm not the creative one, I can put my hand up and say that, but I'm the one who relates to the fun element and the workability element and all that, and sometimes you've got to lose ownership and just give it to someone, and don't be afraid if they tear it apart, because one of those things or two of those things will make your game from a good game to a great game, and you've got to be, you know, humble enough to put your hand up and say that. And sometimes, again, as a business, we will bring in a third party, and we will sit there and we will argue our case out, and then we'll go, and the third party says, well, actually, and they will come in with something fresh. And that, I think, as a hoarder and as a creative person, that's all good. I actually have a box. I don't even have a book. I have a box of stuff, of ideas that we haven't thrown away. But, you know, that's where I keep them, because I think you need to go back to them sometimes and reuse them in another mechanic or another game.
Well, as Tony said, let's see some hands up. People who have designed games, where did you get your inspiration from? Gentleman here.
So I'm not a game designer at all, and I don't have any relationship with the game industry whatsoever. I'm a biochemist by profession. But last year somebody asked me to make a video screen for a business plan. A business plan for a bank idea, nothing to do with games. So I started making when I started making the screen, I realized that I was putting photos, pictures together instead of words, as substitutes of words. So I was putting combinations, different combinations of pictures, for example, jobless, just to explain what the jobless situation in society is. Well, you get a house, you get a bank, and the bank, you get an arrow.
Can I interrupt you, and can you be brief? Because there's
Sure.
lots of people who've got ideas
Sure.
too, and forgive me.
Okay,
it's just
so I got this, suddenly I got this idea of expressing words with pictures.
Yeah, using
and I
image.
showed them to a lot of friends. And they had to, suddenly it occurred to me, they had to answer in English. So 3 days later, a lot of people came back to me, surprisingly, with the answers. You know, they had spent the whole weekend answering these questions. And this is how the game started. So I started making cards with this kind of questions.
the brilliant thing with that, though, is that you were doing something completely different, and you recognise that people. Yeah, I think that's good. I think it's something.
Yeah, I like playing new games. I like playing games I've never played before. Even if it's a game I'm not particularly interested in, I'm interested in the mechanics of it, that you can get for something. But I mean, you say about keeping notes. I keep a dictaphone by my bed. I mean, twice now this has happened. I dreaming I was at a gaming event. So come over, play this new game. This is it. This is how you play. All the rest of it. And I woke up and went, Wrote, just dictated a few notes for a couple of minutes.
You've dreamed a game design.
Yeah, twice I dreamed a game design. Literally, the game is there. And as I looked at it, I went, that works actually. Just woke up in the morning, started working on it. Don't ask me how it happened, but as I just played lots of different games, just something just gelled in the back of my mind. I went, bing, there you go.
Has anybody got any really weird inspiration? I mean, I designed a game from scratch just because I was listening to a My Chemical Romance song. And there's one line in it, and then it turned into a game about bears chasing people through the woods. Oh, that was Keep Running. And it was just like, where did that come from? And it came from literally 2 words in a song, and then boom, I'd then have, within a few weeks there was a fully fledged game.
It's not a weird one, but I've been working on some novels for a number of years, and those sort of led to some ideas that I'm now starting to explore that might make good games. One on the RPG side of things, and another on the board game, maybe a card game as well. And I think one of the things, because I do a lot of creative stuff, that's quite a good tip, is if you've got any other creative hobbies, sometimes they can feed off each other, and you'll start getting ideas for one of your creative areas from another creative area you're involved in. because I do photography and artwork stuff and so on as well.
Yeah, you have to be eclectic. You have to be very widely read and experience lots of different things, I think, to get game design ideas. I think this guy over there.
Yeah.
Well, the Gaston game, which some of you would have heard of, was designed, it came from a rummy contest that I entered on Board Game Geek. And the entries were really complicated and added so much stuff to the game. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if you just stripped it all the way back, took out all the complexities and made it for kids, so it could just sit there and play. And it was my 4-year-old that gave me the inspiration for that. It was the first thing, so what would you like to make with it? She said, ladybirds. Well, I have ladybirds. And so the ladybirds came out. How are we going to do it? Hidden scoring. How are you going to score the game? We got rid of all the points, so you don't have to add up hand points or anything. And it was simple. Have a flower with green fly on it. And have the ladybirds eat the green fly. First person to clear the flower wins. And it was my 4-year-old that gave me almost the whole inspiration for the game, and that was...
Does your 4-year-old get royalties?
I was going to say, you ripped off their IP.
Yeah, this is so...
And similarly, the Inspector Moss house arrest was a mechanic that my game design partner, Rebecca, thought up the mechanics, and the theme was Cluedo.
Yeah.
You've got Cluedo sitting there.
I do, over there.
3 different spins. And it's all about looking as well. As you wander around, even the game halls, looking at the dice, the coloured dice. And I had an idea just on a coloured dice.
Yeah, anything can trigger it,
Anything can spark it.
which is
Yeah.
good.
I like the idea of just stripping things back and taking something, making something simple and reusing ideas in new ways. That's
And
really
also, it's throwing it out to other people
yeah.
to say, that's terrible, or that's work. You get a lot of feedback from playtesting.
Definitely. Gentleman at the back, and then this lady here.
It's not a specific game, it's more like a general ethos that I'm just like happy with your child. And it's something, whether it's a mechanic or a theme, will occur to me, and I'll just play with it, see which way I can take it, different things. And it may not turn into a game, it may be just a mechanic that's put aside which will slot into another idea later on. And things tend to come together as one mechanic enters the game that will preclude others which just don't seem to fit.
Lady here?
Yeah, so the one I'm working on at the minute, came from a chat in a cafe with Dan about just Galaxy Tracker, it's a game I really like, and crossing that with Monsters Inc. and just getting inspiration from other games. So I've kind of got a monster building game.
That's very important.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Playing games. If you play, the more games you play, the more flexibility that you'll have. I mean, you can't copyright game ideas, and as long as you're not ripping off an entire game, then nobody has a problem with you taking a particularly good auction mechanic or a particularly good resource conversion mechanic. You know, these things, what makes a lot of successful games successful is that people can get into the game quite quickly. The pitch is very simple. And so that gives you that leaping off point, so the learning is lower.
Yeah, I mean, Freedom and Fries, the noted German designer like Power Grid, etc., you know, he's basically, if there's green on the box, it's probably his fault. He released a game last year called Copycat, which is just... He's just taken this bit from this game, he's taken that bit from Dominion, and that bit from that auction game, and that bit, and just made...
Geek, wasn't it?
And it was just like, it was this rapturous success, which is great. But playing is vital. I mean, I can certainly see teeny elements of Agricola in Snowdonia. Yeah, what would you being the biggest Agricola fan on Earth?
Because the mechanics work for what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
If you need a mechanic for weather, then you can have a simple mechanic, which something like K2 does. We can have a really complex mechanic, which is just going to sort of confuse the game because it's too complicated. You need something that's going to be intuitive.
I think that's something that's quite difficult sometimes, is to try and keep it simple. I know that I've written it down in my book, keep it simple, stupid, like the KISS rule.
Yeah, everybody does that.
Well, what you can do is you can put everything in at the start. And playtesting, which we should be talking a lot more about very shortly, is the bit where you start taking things out. There's no harm in putting everything in at the beginning, because it tests the strong bits of the design, and it'll just naturally push out all the things that are complicated. A classic sort of method that comes out of playtesting is, if I stop that one thing, that removes an entire paragraph of rules from my rule book. And sometimes you think, well, if I put this thing in, what does it actually benefit, apart from, you know, more chance of confusion and not much extra in terms of the way the game plays. So, put everything in and then be willing, I mean, it was mentioned earlier on, be willing to change and to to scale it back down
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
There's a phrase a famous author said, which is "kill your darlings." And in business world, it's anyone who's indispensable should be sacked immediately. And the idea there being that you keep hold of this thing's precious to you. That's the first thing you should chop out. And one of the things I think, if people have never done any kind of game design before, what I'd really recommend is can you pass up that green box there? Leisure Games yesterday did the thing where they said, unfortunately there aren't any left, but take this game, give us a notional amount of money for the physical elements of it, and then design a game using the components that's not the game it originally was. So I'd say, I thoroughly recommend this. In fact, most of the stuff I do is actually taking existing board games and then creating a brand new game from the bits. And I think if you take a game that you like or you hate, Monopoly is one of my favourites because I hate it, and I'm trying to get a game with the Monopoly board that works. In fact, the latest one I'm working on is a Mornington Crescent, the board game, which uses a Monopoly set. But take a game that you hate or a game and then just say, well, let's use the bits and let's come up with something completely different to what we had before. And that's a good way to get you break the ice.
I would suggest there's an excellent podcast called Flip the Table.
Yes.
They've been running about a year and a half now, American based, and they play what are probably the worst games in history. I mean, they've played like American Idol, the card game. They've played, it's just awful, terrible stuff.
The Klingon video.
Oh yeah, the Star Trek interactive video board game. Experience Beach. It's terrible, but they play it seriously, and they play it like any of us would play, Eclipse or Agricola or whatever, and they take it super seriously. But then, halfway through the show, they will say, "What would you do to make this game better, to make it good, to make it like appealing to a mass audience like us?" And they really, really go into detail. I mean, these guys aren't designers at all, but because they are the people who play games, they can really, really give you some great feedback on these terrible titles.
I would note that with a bit of caution, because Candyland may be an abysmal game in my eyes, but I'm being a bit of a gamer snob. It's sold 50 million copies. Now, to be honest with you, I'd quite like to sell a game that sells 50 million copies.
Well, yeah, I'd be all right with
and
that.
And if it means I have to design Candyland, I'll bloody well do it. So there is a danger with things like Flip the Table where they're actually being a little bit snobbish about the games that they're looking at.
I don't know if they're ever snobbish. I just think they like to see how they can tinker with them.
Yeah, I think in their defence, they do often identify the really good elements.
Yeah, they
even
always
in poor games, they will identify the things that are actually quite good, and that's a really good thing, because we said about bad ideas can lead you to good ideas. Being exposed to bad games is actually a really positive thing, if only because
But a 50
I'm never going
million
to do a dial.
Oh yeah,
a 50 million selling bad game is not a bad
well, no,
game.
they,
is it?
well,
It's
no,
not
it's
a
not,
bad
But
game.
it's not a bad game, but they don't rip on those games. They rip on games.
They've got stuff like RoboCop, the board game.
Yeah.
Teenage Mutant
All
Ninja
the
Turtles.
I'd buy that for
Transformers
half a
game.
I need to be careful about labelling it bad. I mean, Monopoly is a totally limited game, but it's the most successful game.
We should jump
Games
back.
that you don't enjoy.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a bad
It's
game.
just limitations.
It's just what you like.
I think these games are more commodities than games in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, Monopoly in a sense is commoditised to the nth degree. I mean, Gloucestershire Monopoly, I can get
World of Warcraft Monopoly.
So I mean, it's a different thing.
I was going to say that I like the Dice Tower Network, Tom Vassel's little videos on tips and stuff like that. Yes, they're a little bit dramatic, but some of it is it's opinions that probably matter out there, and the American industry is vast, and I think that's quite important, because a lot of what we do is linked to what they do. So I find it's a useful thing to look at that, although I don't always totally agree with it. I'm sure we all have our opinions, but...
Should we throw it open for questions? Because we're just jabbering away here like Egypt. Questions. Give us things. Talk to us. Gentlemen here.
Rule books. What's your advice on rule books?
They're the worst bloody things on earth. They're the hardest part of any game design I do, writing the bleeding rules.
Calm down, Michael. Calm down.
The important thing about rule books is to get them written by somebody who can write, which very often isn't the actual game designer. So I think we have a lot of experience about writing rules, and we will generally, when I'm doing design, I will generally write the rules for almost the simplest type of game that I'm doing, at least 6 times, a complete rewrite. But then, after I've done that, I will hand it over to somebody else and get them to write it properly. And I consider myself as a reasonable rules writer. So it's important not to just do it on your own. You have to get as many different critical people to do it. You need, well, particularly, the great experience we have actually is giving all the stuff to somebody who's never played this game before, preferably somebody who's never even played games before, is to get them to understand it and rewrite it for you. That's the important thing. But you need to have really, really good writers to do.
Yeah, that's the third stage of testing. I think we're going to talk about testing a little bit, but the third stage is people just opening the box and playing the game from the rules, and that can kill a game.
On this point, is there a critical process missing? What is it that makes it difficult for somebody who's designing a game? That makes it difficult to write a rule book?
It's hard.
There's something about objectivity that we're missing out as a process. Because I mean, if you write a book, I mean, normally you only give it so cover before you go it out. You don't endlessly give it.
Yeah, I think it's because the difference between. Yeah, you've got. I think a lot of board game designers are, creatives. And yes, it's your baby, but there's a big difference between, designers and engineers both make stuff. But designers, we do the pretty and we do the thing and
make it pink.
And the engineers will, the engineers can write down this needs to happen, that happens, this happens, this happens, and it's great having somebody on your side who has that distance from the thing that you've created, but also has the understanding on how the game functions and what you need to do in it. And if you can get that and sort of mesh them together, it's golden. I mean, does anybody have any examples like great rule books that they think are fantastic?
Pandemic is one of my favourite rule books.
Galaxy Tracker
Yeah.
Well, I had to rewrite our guards rule book. I put my hand up and say we started off with Z-Man Games and we believed Zev and everything that he said. He was selling his $400,000 house and swimming pool to move to a bigger house in his company the time we signed up with him. We didn't know all this. So we put guards out and he read the rules. And he said, yeah, the rules are grand. A couple of spelling mistakes, they're grand. And we put them out there and, we were slated on Board Game Geek. And I went to conventions where, the game's great, da-da-da-da-da, but you know your rules? And I got quite a lot of in-your-face talk about the rules. And Reiner or whatever, he puts a red pen through it and he just changes it. And I'm like, well, hold on a minute, I'm not him, So what we did is we tried to use intuition, because I've been in business a long time, but not word game business. Took the rules, took everything off Board Game Geek, took all the comments from conventions, and I sat down and tore it all apart. And I put it back. I used to put together step-by-step manuals for staff of how to do things in computers, and basically tried to put it in a process of how the game would flow. What I also added in was the frequently asked questions below each section, and then the God of all gods in rulebooks, a page at the end which says what a player can do on their turn. So the Fantasy Flight rulebook you throw in the corner, you just keep that page on the table and everybody knows what they can do. And that works. And I also gave it to people like Michael and other people to write, to look at before we put it out there, and they went, this is much better, this makes much more sense. And again, that's the bit where I handed it to other people who either could read or hadn't played the game.
A lot of people can read.
I think the important point here is that writing the rule book, a good rule book, is a process, and actually that it's like it is. I'm glad you brought up that one about writing manuals. It's like a technical authorship kind of role. So you have to have people who can do that and can understand the process of that. I mean, we've done a lot of rule books which are dual language, German and English, and we find that a really good thing to do is to give it to a German to do the translation, which means they have to ask about all the bits in the English that they don't understand, which is really good because it focuses your mind on, well, I wrote that, but he doesn't understand what it means, and it probably doesn't mean what I've written. That's really important, and particularly we found, because we're English and we write colloquial English occasionally, you want them to read international English type of stuff, and that makes it really clearer, because they will always go for, the Germans would always go, well, hopefully, for the simple English word.
Except
whereas we might pick the exact word that we mean. Oh, and one thing, don't put jokes as part of the core of the rules. Don't put.
Yeah, Vlada does that very well.
Don't put complicated technical. We found that with Copital. Now,
don't write it in fake medieval English.
We wrote it as part of the kind of experience, And we learned very quickly that, yeah, you don't do that.
You guys don't appreciate that as gamers. You say, sorry, I want to know how to play the game. I don't want all the flowery stuff.
You can have flowery stuff as part of the marketing and the surrounding graphics and all that kind of stuff.
I'm gonna
the rules have got to be in plain English. Plain English.
Yeah. I'll throw in another caveat, of course, because what is a fantastic rule book to one group of people is an utterly awful rule book to everybody else. And, you know, it's usually 50-50 split for a non-controversial rule book. You know.
Except for Fantasy Flight, of course.
Yeah.
Turn to page 35, turn to page 12.
Right, this gentleman here.
Well, actually, a non-example of a good rule book, but a bad one that astonished me. Just this weekend, been playing Martin Wallace's Aeroplanes. Who proofread that rule book? Did anybody?
Have you never followed Martin's career in games? Have you never? This goes all the way back to the Civil War.
There are typos. There are words missing. Somewhere it refers to an aeroplane card, it means airport card. There's an example box, where a big yellow box out, where example, the first line of it is outside the box. This is not rocket science. It's blatantly obvious.
It's aeroplane science.
Very
I'm going to say, go on Board Game Geek, tell them all about it.
Yeah, because he'll love that.
You and several 100,000 others, I think.
Gentleman, yeah, let's talk testing.
Okay,
testing is great.
I do this because it's part of my you can make your own game in an hour workshops that I do. Start off with a 50-minute prototype. The first thing you do is you sit down with the game and you talk people through. As the designer, they're there with you. You're leading the game the way that someone who's learned the rules would lead a game session. Yeah, but you're the designer. So when they say, well, but can you inflate the toggle pocket in an anti-clockwise way? You go, yeah, actually, it's a really good, yeah, you can do that, yeah. And then the second stage is where you're observing them playing the game, but when they go, what's a toggle pocket? You go, well, a toggle pocket, and you can intervene as the designer in that. But the third stage is when you're either not there, which is the best thing, and they send you back feedback, or you're there but you're not allowed to interact with them. And they have to come up with house rules. Like last night we were play testing a game and we were trying to work out, well, how do you use this card? How many resources? Let's assume this is the way we're playing it, and then we'll write down that's what we assumed. And if that was right, great. But why did we have to guess? The rule book should have it in. And if it was wrong, they need to know that we interpreted it that way. So that's the kind of, I don't know about you guys, but that's my kind of very succinct way of describing testing.
Traditional way of testing that we generally do, well, the first thing is you make a prototype for yourself and you play it to death yourself. There's absolutely nothing worse than producing a prototype and play testing it with.
See, I see that as part of design rather than testing, but yeah. Okay.
Well, yeah. There's always grey areas. So place it a lot yourself, and then play test it with people that you at least vaguely trust. So you get an idea that it will work with some other people.
There is nothing more valuable than having friends who will happily sit down and play something dreadful that you have made.
Or game design club, because that's a good thing.
We're quite lucky because we run a regular game designers day for UK game designers in Stroud. Not UK game designers in Stroud, but in Stroud.
Yeah, that'd be really limited area.
Design group. Yeah.
And that's
play test. Come to us.
You will get friends. You will get friends by being a good game designer. It will win you friends and influence people.
No. To be fair, actually, our game designers days are quite interesting because we've got a lot of very experienced game designers. There is nothing more therapeutic than having one of your games totally destroyed because it actually does tell you something. Sometimes it's quite hard to work out exactly what it is telling you, but it does, you get huge amounts of really good professional feedback from having testing with other game designers. We've got access to other game designers, particularly very, very experienced ones. Play testing, well, we know you can never do enough play testing.
I think we need to hear from Matt because he knows all about play testing.
Yeah, so my name's Matt Dunster, I'm part of Playtest UK. So it's a network of game designers in the UK. So there's a regular meet-up in London where people at any stage of game design can bring their games. You can book a session of essentially 90 minutes and you've got a willing audience to play your game. And then you play other people's designs. And it's been really successful. I think we have about 200 members and it's growing. And we're also setting up hopefully new meetups throughout the UK. So I think places to look at in Newcastle, there's one in Cambridge where I'm from. And so I think that's a good way that you don't necessarily have to personally know other people. It's a good way to get to know the community. So I definitely, and we're just next door, so if anyone wants to know more information about playtesting. I'm not struggling, but I think it's pretty important step for people if you don't know what the next step is.
We're not exclusive. I think we're always meeting up with people and saying, well, come along to our designer days. You guys have got playtest meetup groups. I think, you know, as a British game design community, we have to work together. The Germans got a fantastic network for this kind of stuff. The Americans have got a fantastic network for this kind of stuff. And, you know, the Brit designs are up to the same level as all of those, and we should be getting and encouraging. We shouldn't be insular and saying, well, I'm just going to worry about my stuff.
Yeah, you shouldn't just be sitting in your office just going, this is going to be amazing.
I was going to, yeah. I was going to say a little bit there. I know sort of still design, but it's useful at play tests to have bits with you. Because if someone comes up with something, they might want to actually stop and try it that way. And you know, that's the bit where you sort of slightly ripped apart. You thought you got it so far. And they say, but what if we had a card to do this? And you just have cards, or you have a marker pen or something blank, and you throw it in there and then let them do it again. It's very handy to be able to do that. So don't just expect you brought a play test, because they will pull out the what ifs that you didn't expect. And if you're sitting there, you're thinking, oh yeah, I'll write a note. You've then got to go back again to them another day, and you've got to play it about with your friends. Whereas if they take it at that point, you let them take it on a little bit for you, and take the feedback from what they do. As you said, step back and go, okay.
You have to.
Bribery's very good as well. Give them pizza.
Here's this guy.
These guys, and then you, sir.
I was wondering how you sort of avoid the problem of with design where you disseminate it to other people, where you end up with a car that's got a toaster in it and it's got a jet wash, and how by giving it to other people, each person has their own idea of what a good design is, and how do you sort of prevent or say this is where I don't want your influence anymore?
Yeah, you can't just include everything that everybody says, and it's important that this is your game, it's your call, and if you think it's going to work, you test it once again, you bring it back to within an inch of its life, and take it from there. Alan, what do you think?
A few comments on that one. Yeah. Playtesting feedback is very interesting. It comes in several flavours. It comes in the very general flavour, I hate it or I like it, which is not desperately helpful. It comes in another flavour, which is, that's all very well, but it really ought to go like this, and this, and here's my detailed views of this, and that's how this ought to work. In other words, somebody's redesigning your game. Now, there's very often, you trace that back, there's some kind of flaw that might be there. So your feedback that you get should be, you should field it as comments on the current state of play of your design. And you as the designer or developer are making decisions about what to do about it. Solutions, people will always give you solutions. They'll always try to redesign your game or bits of it. You don't have to do anything with those at all. They're merely indicating that there may be a problem. Typically, I know Richard Brees, when he does it, he makes copious notes about what people's suggestions are, but he will make the decision about what will happen. Because very often, with the greatest respect to lots of playtesters, solutions aren't necessarily what adequate for the game. I mean, I've been working. Can I mention Martin again? Yeah. We're working with Martin's Waterloo system. I don't know if you know the Waterloo system, and there is a flaw in that game, which a number of people have recognised quite a lot on BGG. And people have got lots and lots of solutions for this particular flaw, but generally they're very, very complicated things which don't fit in with the actual rest of the game design. So I'm kind of trying to address this and trying to do some kind of supplementary games using that system. So I'm taking the comment, yeah, there's this flaw, and this is the detail of what that flaw means. And I'm not taking other people's solutions. I'm using those solutions as inspiration, perhaps, for what might happen. And then I'll come up with my own solution for that, which fits in with the rest of the design and is simple enough that people will actually understand and work with. So it's very much the designer and developers who are going to make the decisions on those comments. The playtest comments are absolutely vital because they're indicating that there might be something wrong there. But the solutions have to come from that design development thought.
It's almost like you have to work back into it's like something has occurred and that's where the flaw is, and it all spreads out from there, and you've got to like get your Sherlock Holmes on and start digging back in and back in and back in and back in, and then like excising that little bit and chucking it out and then starting again. Sir?
On the blind playtesting part, what I've done in the past, it basically, just put my phone on voice record, put it down in the middle of the table, put the game next to it, and say, here it is. You basically just stand back and just basically record everything. Yeah, when people say, oh, hang on, what happens to this? They try to look at the rules. Hang on, what does that mean? Do you think that means this, that means that? Just listening to their discussion process and how they're trying to figure it out. And if they can't figure out from the rules, then okay, there's something missing in the rules, or there's something missing on the card. But you know, you just listen to how people are analysing what the difficulty is, and then just say, oh, hang on a minute, right, if I do that way instead of if I word it this way, it solves the problem.
I did that once and they stole my phone.
The lesson here, people are dicks. Lucy?
How do you go about figuring out the maths of the game? As in, because that's the one thing I'm struggling with. Yeah, well, the one thing I'm struggling with is actually just getting numbers down initially. So say you've got a combat game with a combat mechanic, is how do you go about figuring out the numbers?
You grab a tame mathematician who probably doesn't have many friends. If you've ever met a mathematician and wondered how they got that way, IMFG, a mathematician. And spreadsheets are great for doing analysis of things like dollar rolls and balance and so on. And actually there is Spreadsheet the Game, which is one technique that we use with the student, where you say model it in a spreadsheet. If you can model it in a spreadsheet, then you know that you can play around with it. What if they have 3d6 instead of 2d6 and so on? If you're not very confident with maths yourselves, then try and grab someone who is. That's one of the nice things about setting up game design clubs, is to kind of get, because there'll be someone who's the mechanics, technical, mathematical guy who always approaches games from the point of view of, I've got this wonderful engine and you're in 3/6 and they never kind of get the idea of theme or fun. So they're great because they need to be, this is me, they need to, this is me by the way, they need to be pulled out of themselves. But they can really add a lot to what you're doing. But the other thing is, do things like go on Board Game Geek, because there's a board game design forum on Board Game Geek. We've been saying BGG, by the way. If anyone did get that, there's a wonderful website called Board Game Geek, and there are others. In fact,
there is the Board Game Design Forum,
Board Game Design Forum, which is another great one as well. But the Board Game Geek is fairly friendly, and it might be a good first toe. You get some trolls, okay, fair enough. But you can dip a toe into board game design and say, hi, I've got this kind of idea. Can anyone give me some help with this?
Yeah, make sure if you post on Board Game Geek, you do it in Comic Sans font.
Oh, God.
It's the in-house font.
Yeah. By the way, caps lock is a requirement.
Yeah. Caps lock, Comic Sans.
Post it in yellow on white, that would be good as well.
But basically, ask, if you can't ask locally, then, ask,
And be what's open-minded about the answers you get.
Yeah, take them with a pinch of salt.
Because you will get people coming back who are the world's biggest experts in board game design, and they've never designed anything. All they do is go on, rate this game 2. Have you played it? No, but anyway.
Yeah.
So you will get people.
By osmosis, I know that this game is rubbish.
Yeah,
that's it. Gentlemen in the back, please.
Thank you. Quick question. You obviously brought games to market. How do you go about establishing volumes?
It's how much money you've got in your bank account. Pretty much determines.
That's a fairly easy, an answer which is fairly easy to say. But that's one of the big issues. To get the economies of scale, you've always got to make a certain volume, but you don't want to be overproduced, as it were. So how do you go about it?
Yes, this is quite. We're quite a small company at Surprise Stare. So I mean, for example, we would never, at the moment, be able to fund, say, 20,000 copies of a game. We just wouldn't have the funding to do it. And we are not employed by our companies. We've all got jobs. So we haven't got vast amounts of finance to hand. So if we're doing a production ourselves, our marketing is generally geared towards selling things at the Essenspiel, at here, and direct sales, and a bit of wholesale, a bit of stuff at the States. So we would think that our maximum kind of first run of a game would probably be only a couple of thousand. So in fact, even more nowadays, we're going towards small volume stuff to see if it's going to take off. So Paperclip Railways, which was one of Tony's recent ones, our initial one was 200 copies. Now, 200 copies. Now, 10 years ago, we couldn't have produced 200 copies of something because the unit cost of them is so high that we wouldn't have been able to afford it. Nowadays, you can do small volume print runs of stuff. I mean, you can get card games. You can do card games through various companies.
Drive-through cards have just launched over in the States. You essentially you load your files onto there, and people can buy them on spec. You know, they can print on demand. They print on demand. They will send it out to you, and they're very, very nice
and we've
condition.
used Arts Cows, another one we can get cards printed for you. But it is quite.
Question at the website. British Games. What was the third?
British Game Design Forum. Sorry, not British
Board
Game.
Game
It's Board Game
Design
Design Forum. It's a worldwide forum.
Just do a search on Google.
Yes. Some information on the just to answer the question suggested that the maths tell you that a run of about 3,000 of new publishers where you tend to break even. It seems to be the number that keeps coming up. Well, would you argue that is too high or about?
It really depends. It really depends on the game. It really depends on the game. I mean, for card games,
the card games,
you can get much lower volume.
Can I just interrupt and say you don't have to publish this. We can be board game designers with a print run of one. In fact, almost all the games I produce are actually print and play off my blog. I don't seek to try and make them publishable games. I mean, as designers, that's almost kind of not your job, although I think production is, for a professional designer, something they have to consider what's going to be the unit cost. For example, I put in a bid to the AHRC for a grant to do a choreographed dice game, and I was looking at that, and they said minimum order 25, it's going to cost you £6 per die, 8 dice, to produce that small quantity. Now I can get a grant to produce 25 sets, because I'm never going to do that commercially. It's never going to happen. I'm not going to be Rory Story Cubes for dance. You know, or Twister the dice game. Well, I don't know. But I think most people here, you know, if you think you're going to be Ryan Knizia or Martin Wallace and you're going to become a game designer and sell loads of things, you've got the wrong idea. I think the big thing is to design games, because if you keep designing games over and over again, it might be that one of them does have that nugget of being a really good commercial game. The big thing, I said at the very beginning, is finish something. Because asking how many do I need to produce, have you actually finished the game you're talking about? You finished? Well, that's good. Have you actually had it play tested by other people?
Yes, we have.
Okay, well that's all right then. So now you're in a position where you can start trying to go around to publishers, distributors, and try and get the game published on Kickstarter. But for most people, just finishing something is good. You know, and
there's a great sense of achievement actually finishing a game
and getting feedback,
stepping back and saying, "I'm not touching that anymore."
I think you need to know what your marketing policy and what your market is. You can't just produce 3,000 copies of a collectible card game with a science fiction theme and expect that everybody's going to go rushing out because science fiction is popular. It doesn't work that way. If you know you're going to go to Expo and you're going to go to Essen, and you know realistically that if you go to Essen, if you sell 500 copies of a game, you're doing really well. You know, if you go to Essen, people tell you 150,000 people in 5 days. Great, well I'll print 200,000 and I'll sell most of them, I'll be fine. No, you'd be lucky to sell 500 to 1,000 copies of your game. So you need to be realistic, and you need to know your market. And what we did in Surprise Dares, we started with a card game, because from a production point of view, it's the simplest thing that we could do. And then we took it out there, and we kind of sampled the water with it.
Before we move on to this lady now, final one, Andy Hopwood, who runs Hopwood Games out there, he does game runs of 100. And they're lovely, they're beautifully produced. He's got a new one called Disgrace and Favours he's launched this weekend. And a run of 100 games is great. If you sell 100 games and you make them and you sell 100 games, wicked. That's fantastic. You've just sold 100 games that you've made. And yeah, it's a pain in the ass putting them together and collating them all and everything yourself. But you've just sold 100 games, which is a damn sight more than many people have done. And it's an achievement. If you manage to then take that a step further and further and further, get it licensed, get it picked up by a bigger company, even better. But don't underestimate the fact that just finishing a game is no big thing. It's a huge deal, and it's wonderful. Right, last thing from this lady here.
So, well, it's kind of, I'm a sort of budding illustrator, and I'm just wondering how you go about getting the illustrations.
I have a wife, and she's amazing at it.
Yeah, I don't know, just the sort of contacts that you get, because I've done a couple of illustrations for one board game that's been done up there. But
which one?
Sorry?
Which one?
Plug it.
Well, it's The Last Council. It's too much games in the corner. It's still kind of in the...
Much do you charge?
But it's, yeah, I'm just wondering how you guys sort of... Obviously, you've got
We have our own.
But how you go looking
Well, we
for-
do stuff ourselves. I mean,
Yeah.
I do a bit of stuff. Charlie does painting. Your daughter does some fantastic stuff for us.
My
Other
eldest
people-
daughter illustrates games.
Yeah, I mean,
It's who you know, really.
but also
That helps.
But it doesn't always go that way because the style that we all have that may not work for the game that we're doing. So you do have to go elsewhere. I'd say get yourself a little corner, a table somewhere, in places like this, and say this is my work, and go around and talk to all these companies. Come and talk to us. Come and talk to all.
Because I hate the artwork. Carcassonne, when I saw the box for that, I hate the artwork.
It's very subjective, isn't it?
Yeah.
Lots of medieval people looking miserable.
Yeah, it just doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
How many games have got that?
There is a very important point for illustrators who are doing games work. Don't expect to get much money, unfortunately. Well, you probably experienced that already, but I mean, yeah, my daughter illustrates games.
What I would say is
she
important.
doesn't make a living doing it yet.
What's important
really,
for us
really difficult to get money.
is that, I mean, we had Stephen Player did our illustrations for Guards, and we had a student in the college doing illustrations for Luchador. It doesn't matter who it is. If we need an illustration of something by a certain date, you have to do it.
Yeah.
You know, that it doesn't matter if he's getting paid megabucks or he's getting paid very little. The company who's employing you need you to do it by X. You need to do it by X because they have other reasons for getting it out there. And you'll find if you have that flexibility, you will get more work.
Being professional about it is the absolute necessity. Yeah,
That's one thing I've
definitely.
had hammered into me at college is
Yeah,
don't really
definitely.
late. You will lose custom if you
That's good.
miss your deadline, you scuppered yourself. People won't come back. So.
Now, guys, I'm afraid to say we're going to have to wrap up. If you do have questions, I'm sure if we're about, just grab us. Well, don't grab us, that would be a bad thing. But, you know, come up, say hello, and ask us things, and we'll do our damnedest to help. Because that's what we're here for. You know, as Tony said, the British game design community should be a community. We should come together. We should, you know, we should talk. We should be able to talk about each other's games, each other's projects, each other's art, whatever. One final thought to wrap up. Loads of people are always worried about, oh, what about telling my game? You know, what should I tell people about my idea? Of course, you should bloody tell people about your ideas. How else are they going to grow? You know, an idea is like a little plant. You don't leave it in the dark and keep it in your head. Make it, like Mike said. Get it out there. Play the damn thing. Finish it. And then hopefully next year we'll see a whole bunch of you sitting out there behind a table with stuff to sell. There we go.
We're done.
We're done. Thank you very much.